Hello, friends. It's Monday, March 23rd, and we are all sort of reckoning with the coronavirus pandemic and trying to cope. Just an update this week, I'm going to have an episode with author and journalist Asha Daya, who has gone from an evangelical worship leader to a feminist author and reproductive rights activist in just a few years. It's an amazing interview. On Friday, Dan and I are going to have a great episode on what I'm calling the first evangelical president, Jimmy Carter, and why, surprisingly, it would be lovely to have him back in the Oval Office. We're going to compare him to Donald Trump and just kind of see the kind of strange comparison points in their lives and why counterintuitively Jimmy Carter, the evangelical, was quite the opposite of what we think of as evangelical today. Just for now, a very brief reflection. I've been thinking a lot about all the things that we often take for granted. All of us are stuck in the house and we're missing out on small things like weekly lunch with a friend, big things like birthday parties and celebrations, and even bigger things like a wedding. I know some people are even having to think about how to bury their loved ones during this time. And it made me think of a quote from Gerald Murphy. Gerald Murphy was part of the Lost Generation in the 1920s. He was very close to Scottl Fitzgerald and Scottl Fitzgerald and other members of the Lost Generation. And, he was very privileged, but inevitably, as happens in life, despite how much money you have, people get sick, people have a hard time. And that happened with him. His friend Scottl Fitzgerald went to an asylum because she was mentally ill. One of his children went to a sanatorium because he was very, very sick and then died. And then, of course, the Great Depression happened and there was kind of worldwide suffering. Here's a quote he gave to Scottl Fitzgerald back in those days. I remember saying to him that for me, only the invented part of life was satisfying, only the unrealistic part. Things happen to you, sickness, birth, Zelda and Prangans, which is the asylum, Patrick in the sanatorium, Father Weiberg's death. These things were realistic, and you couldn't do anything about them. Do you mean you don't accept those things? Scott asked. Scott is Scottl Fitzgerald. I replied that of course I accepted them, but I didn't feel they were the important things, really. And I know this could be taken the wrong way, as if birth and death aren't important, but I don't think that's what he's saying. I think when he says the invented part of life was satisfying, he was referring to something that I talk about often with my students, which is this, that as human beings, we're born into a world we didn't choose, and we're really aware of the fact that we're mortal the whole time we're here. And then we die. It really seems like being human could be looked at as a curse, like, compared to the very thoughtless plants in my garden or the very seemingly happy squirrels running around in my backyard. Human beings are always faced with their mortality, with the suffering of others, and with questions about what their lives mean. What Gerald Murphy points to, though, is that the invented parts, the parts that we create in order to superimpose meaning onto this world, those are the things that are really significant. And I think those are the things that a lot of us are missing right now. And a lot of us are becoming aware of how much we take for granted. And like I said, that could be a hug from a friend you haven't seen in a couple days or in a couple years. That could be a visit from your friends down the road who often come over for dinner. That could be the chance to tell the story of your birth at your birthday party and to celebrate the fact that you're here and that you're trying your best. That could be something as big as a wedding, a story that says, hey, we met and fell in love, and we want all of you to become part of that story by coming to this ceremony. Those invented parts of life, those made up parts of life, are the ways that we give meaning and significance to this really strange and absurd life we have on earth. And, it's easy to think of being made up as always a bad thing because we're living under administration that just makes up things all the time. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that's good and okay, and that's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the way that we tell stories and narratives, the ways that we live out those stories in our small and big rituals, that those are the real things. Those are the real parts of our life. And so I want to encourage you. We're going to get through this. It's a hard time. It's something that none of us have faced before. And when we do get through it, I hope that we really, really, really appreciate the real things, which are often the made up things. Thanks for being here. I'll see you later this week.